They laughed, loud, careless, unbelieving laughs, as the American soldiers laid out their breakfast. Toast, eggs, and something they hadn't tasted in years. Freedom. These were Japanese women prisoners of war, once proud daughters of an empire that had promised eternal victory. Now, sitting at a long wooden table in a humid Philippine morning of 1945, they mocked the simplicity of the meal before them. But when they took that first bite, the laughter died. Silence fell. Then came tears, uncontrollable, unguarded, human tears. Because in that moment they realized the war was truly over, and they were alive. What happened next would reveal a story buried in the ashes of surrender, of pride. Propaganda, starvation, and the shattering of illusions. These women had been more than prisoners. They were symbols of a nation that told them to die before capture. Yet here they were, captured, fed, and confused by kindness. As dawn rose over the ruins of Japan's fading empire, the world changed, and so did they. This is the untold story of Japanese women POWs, who laughed at an American breakfast and cried tasting real freedom. The empire's daughters before the laughter, before the tears, before the strange morning when freedom was served on tin plates, there had been devotion, the kind that burned so fiercely it blinded. Japan's women were told they were the soul of the nation, the keepers of purity, the silent strength behind their soldiers. And they believed it. They stitched flags with trembling hands, whispering banzai into each thread, sending sons and brothers to die with smiles that hid their fear. When war came close, it did not ask for permission. It swallowed everything. Tokyo's factories roared with the rhythm of exhaustion, and girls barely 16 worked until their fingers bled. In schools, they were taught to despise weakness. To surrender was sin. To survive was shame. And to serve the emperor, even in captivity, was their only purpose. Among them was Yumi Sato. A nurse trained by the Imperial Army, she had volunteered for service in the Pacific, believing her care would be part of Japan's glory. But by 1945, there was no glory left. Just smoke, hunger, and a sky that thundered with American planes. When the bombs fell on Manila, Yumi was stationed in a makeshift hospital near the bay, once a proud outpost, now a cage of desperation. Supplies were gone. The wounded begged for water that no one could give. Each night she prayed for Japan's victory. Each morning she found herself praying instead for it all to end. Then, it did. The surrender came like a whisper, not a roar, not a cry of resistance. Just the quiet collapse of something sacred. The officers burned documents. The nurses gathered in silence, watching the smoke rise. When word spread that Americans were approaching, Yumi's superior ordered them to prepare for death. "We ought to die as imperial women," she said. "There will be no capture." But the gun she handed Yumi trembled in both their hands. The Americans came not with bullets, but with white flags and open palms. They were taller, louder, strange. They offered food, medicine, even smiles. Some of the women refused to eat. Others spat on the ground, shouting curses they barely believed anymore. Yet when night fell, hunger gnawed deeper than pride. Yumi could not sleep. She could still hear the emperor's voice on the radio, that haunting, distant tone announcing surrender. The war, the one she had given everything for, had vanished in a few trembling words. What did that make her now? A survivor. Or a coward? Days passed. The prisoners were moved to a camp once used for captured Americans, a cruel irony no one dared mention aloud. The barbed wire glistened in the morning dew, but it wasn't the same kind of prison anymore. There were beds, water, guards who nodded instead of shouting. The women did not know what to do with that kind of mercy. Rumors spread like fever. Some said the Americans would humiliate them. Others said they would force them to serve. Yet what came instead was an order that made no sense. Prepare for breakfast. Yumi stared at the sergeant who delivered the message. Breakfast? She whispered, her voice cracked from thirst. He nodded, smiling as if it were the most ordinary thing in the world. That night, the women lay awake, whispering under the moonlight. What did Americans eat? Was it poisoned? Was it a trick to make them betray their emperor even in defeat? No one knew. But beneath the fear, something else stirred curiosity. In the morning, they were lined up outside the mess hall. The smell hit first: warm bread, coffee, something rich and sweet that made their stomachs twist in confusion. Some laughed. Nervous, mocking laughter. Others covered their faces, ashamed of wanting it. Yumi tried to keep her head high. She had promised herself she would never take food from the enemy. But as the steam rose from the plates, her resolve wavered. The Americans placed a tray before her: toast, scrambled eggs, butter, a slice of something golden, pancakes. A few of the women giggled, whispering that it looked disgusting, foreign, unholy. The laughter spread like a defense against the unbearable truth that they were powerless and starving. Yumi forced a smile. "They think we'll thank them for this," she muttered to no one. But her voice shook. The guard across from her, a young American barely older than her brother had been, looked at her with a strange softness. "You should eat," he said quietly. His accent was thick, his tone kind. "You're free now." The words struck like a blow. Free. What did that mean? Yumi looked down at the plate. Her hand trembled as she picked up the fork. The laughter around her had faded into uneasy murmurs. She took a bite. The sweetness of syrup melted on her tongue. The eggs were warm, soft, unreal. Her throat tightened. For the first time in years, the taste wasn't rationed or rotten. It was real. And that reality shattered her. Tears came without warning. Hot, heavy, unstoppable. She tried to hide them, but others were already crying too. The room filled with quiet sobs, the kind that come when a soul finally breaks open. No one laughed anymore. Outside, the American guard lowered his eyes. He didn't understand their words, but he understood the sound. In that silence, Yumi felt the weight of everything she'd believed collapsing around her. The empire that had taught her to despise weakness had fallen, and in its place stood strangers offering kindness she couldn't comprehend. But even as the tears fell, another feeling began to stir, a cold, uncertain fear. Because kindness, she realized, was more dangerous than hate. Hate kept you certain. Kindness made you question everything. That night, Yumi couldn't sleep. The women spoke in whispers, wondering what would come next. Some said they would be sent home. Others feared trial, shame, or worse. Yumi stared at the stars through the gaps in the wire and wondered if Japan still existed, or if the homeland she had loved was only ever an illusion. Then came a sound, faint, distant, from the guard's radio. A woman's voice in English, calm and soft, speaking of peace, rebuilding, and a new world beginning. Yumi turned toward it, listening through the static. And for the first time, she wondered, was this what freedom sounded like? The next morning, something unexpected awaited them in the camp courtyard, a delivery that none of them could explain, and with it, the first sign that the war inside them was far from over. Captured sons. The crates arrived at dawn. Wooden, weathered, stamped with bold black letters, U.S. Army rations. The American soldiers carried them as if they were nothing. To the women watching from behind the wire, they looked like boxes filled with another kind of power, strange, foreign, terrifyingly generous. Yumi stood among them, silent. She still felt the taste of that first breakfast on her tongue, haunting her like a memory she couldn't decide to cherish or despise. The camp had grown quieter since then. The laughter was gone. In its place lingered a stillness that felt like morning. When the Americans began unpacking the crates, curiosity overtook fear. Inside were cans, bottles, cloth sacks of flour, sugar, words many of them hadn't spoken in years. For Yumi, each item was a reminder of what war had stolen. The nurse in her wanted to rejoice. The soldier in her, the one who had lived under orders and slogans, wanted to reject it all. The officer in charge, a calm man with gray eyes and a soft southern drawl, stepped forward. "You're not our prisoners," he said slowly, pointing first at them, then at the gate. "Your people. War's done." His words didn't fit inside their minds. They had been taught Americans were monsters, that capture meant humiliation worse than death. Yet the man spoke as though he pitied them, as though he wanted them to live. It was unbearable. That afternoon, Yumi helped distribute medical supplies. The Americans let her tend to the weakest among the women. They trusted her hands, and that trust unsettled her more than any threat could have. She wrapped bandages, checked pulses, whispered prayers she wasn't sure anyone heard. One girl, barely 17, held Yumi's wrist and whispered, "Why do they help us?" Yumi had no answer. Days passed. The camp changed. The soldiers replaced the wire fence with a wooden gate that was left unlocked during the day. Music began drifting from their radio, swing songs, laughter, voices full of life. The sound was alien and intoxicating, but beneath that uneasy peace, something darker brewed. One evening, an argument erupted near the laundry shed. A group of women, those most devoted to the empire, accused others of betrayal. "You smile at them," one shouted, her voice breaking. "You eat their food, wear their clothes? You dishonor Japan." Yumi stepped between them, trying to calm the storm. But the older woman turned her fury on her. "You nurse. You let them use you. You think kindness erases what they did to our country?" Yumi didn't reply. Because deep down, she feared the woman might be right. That night, the accused women slept apart, whispering in secret. Shame was a wound that refused to heal. And in the quiet hours before dawn, Yumi heard someone weeping outside. The kind of weeping that came from a heart too tired to resist. When she found the girl, she was kneeling before a small scrap of paper, the torn corner of a photograph showing her brother in uniform. He had died on Okinawa. The girl held the paper close and whispered, "He would hate me for surviving." Yumi knelt beside her. "He'd be glad you're alive," she said, though she wasn't sure she believed it. The girl looked up, her eyes hollow. "No, he'd think I was already dead the moment I was captured." The words cut deep. Morning came heavy. The Americans brought new supplies, soap, books, even dresses. The women were allowed to bathe, to read, to feel human again. But that humanity came with guilt. Every smile felt like betrayal. Every act of kindness felt like weakness. Then came the day the officers called the visit. A jeep arrived carrying a journalist from an Allied paper. He was there to document the recovery of Japanese female POWs. Cameras flashed. The women were lined up like exhibits, thin, pale, dressed in donated uniforms that hung loose on their frames. The reporter asked them questions through an interpreter. "How do you find American treatment? Do you wish to go home? What do you think of peace?" No one answered at first. Then one of the younger women whispered, "Peace. Feels strange?" The interpreter hesitated, then repeated her words. The journalist nodded solemnly, writing something in his notebook. But his eyes weren't cruel. They were curious, searching for a story, maybe even sympathy. Later, the Americans pinned small red crosses on the nurses' sleeves, recognizing them as medical personnel. Yumi stared at hers. It should have felt like honor. Instead, it felt like surrender. That night, the camp was restless. The women couldn't sleep. They spoke of home, of cities reduced to ashes, of families lost to fire. And in the silence between their stories, something new began to emerge. Not hatred, not pride, but doubt. Yumi lay awake, watching the stars. The same stars that once shone over Tokyo now glimmered above this strange place, shared with men who should have been her enemies. And she wondered if the emperor still looked at them, or if even he had stopped believing. Then came the sound. Footsteps, slow, deliberate. She turned. At the far end of the barracks, a figure moved, one of the women clutching something metallic, glinting faintly in the moonlight. Yumi froze. It was the same older woman who had called her a traitor. She walked toward the gate, past the sleeping guards. The object in her hand caught the light, a small blade sharpened from a broken can. Yumi rose and followed quietly. When she caught up, the woman turned, eyes blazing with tears. "I can't live like this," she hissed. "I won't eat their food. I won't breathe their air." Yumi whispered her name, pleading. But the woman's resolve was unbreakable. "They say we're free," she said bitterly. "Then I'll choose my freedom." Before Yumi could reach her, the woman drove the blade into her chest. The world stopped. The guards came running, their shouts echoing through the night. Yumi knelt in the dirt, pressing her hands to the wound. But the life was already leaving the woman's eyes. The next morning, silence reigned over the camp. The Americans buried her with full honors, draping a makeshift flag over her body. Yumi stood among the others, her hands trembling, her heart torn between grief and rage. For the first time she saw it clearly, this war had not ended. Not truly. It had simply moved inside them. When the ceremony ended, the American officer approached her. "We're moving you soon," he said softly. "To a hospital in Manila. You'll help us care for the others." Yumi looked past him toward the gate, now open wide. Beyond it lay the unknown. She didn't answer. That night, as the wind carried the scent of the sea, she whispered to herself, "Maybe freedom isn't given. Maybe it has to be earned." But before she could find out what that meant, a sound tore through the calm, the distant hum of approaching trucks. Headlights slicing through the darkness. Something or someone was coming. The breakfast table. They arrived before sunrise, a convoy of trucks grinding to a halt outside the wire fence, engines rumbling in the mist. The sound pulled the women from their bunks. Yumi stood at the doorway, heart thudding, the morning air cold against her skin. She half expected soldiers with rifles, another round of orders, another test of obedience. But what came instead were boxes. More of them. Marked not with military codes, but with a single word she hadn't seen since her childhood. Relief. The Americans unloaded them with quiet efficiency. No shouting, no swagger. Just the smell of coffee and wood smoke drifting through the camp as dawn bled across the horizon. Something was different today. The soldiers moved with an energy that didn't feel like duty. It felt like preparation. The women were told to gather near the open field where tables had been set. Real tables, not crates, not tin trays, polished wood lined with plates, cups, even flowers in chipped vases. The sight drew murmurs of disbelief. For a moment no one moved. It looked like a trap dressed as kindness. Yumi hesitated at the edge of the group, clutching her worn satchel of bandages. The memory of the suicide in the night still pressed heavy on her chest. She couldn't erase the image of the woman's face, the defiance, the relief, the surrender. And yet here the Americans were, offering another breakfast, as though sorrow could be washed away with food. A soldier approached, the same young man who had spoken to her before, the one with the easy, almost boyish smile. "You should eat," he said again. "It's not rations this time, it's celebration." "Celebration?" she asked, disbelief soft in her voice. "Japan signed the papers," he said. "It's over. For real this time." The words hit her like wind against the hollow door. It was over, officially, completely. The empire she had served no longer existed. She wanted to feel relief. Instead, she felt untethered. When the women sat, their movements were cautious, almost ritualistic. Some bowed their heads, whispering apologies to ghosts. Others stared at the plates as if afraid to touch them. The Americans waited silently until every seat was filled. Then one of their officers stood and raised his voice. "Today," he said, "no sides, no ranks. Just people." The words hung in the air. A few women exchanged uncertain glances. Yumi looked down at her plate. Eggs, fruit, bread, and something new, small white bowls of creamy liquid sprinkled with cinnamon. She didn't know the name for it. She didn't need to. The smell alone brought a strange ache to her throat. The laughter came again, just as it had before. Nervous, brittle, the last defense of pride. A group of women at the far end began whispering that this was all performance, propaganda for American cameras. One of them smirked and said, "They feed us like pets so they can tell the world how kind they are." The others chuckled, relieved to find a reason to sneer. Yumi wanted to believe them. She wanted to hold on to that bitterness. But when she looked up, she saw one of the soldiers watching from a distance, his eyes not mocking, not triumphant. Just tired. Something inside her shifted. She picked up the spoon. The first taste was soft, sweet, impossibly light, milk and warmth and memory. It reminded her of mornings before the war, of her mother stirring rice over a small stove, of peace that had once felt eternal. For a moment, the years of fear and fire and loss melted away, her chest tightened. She swallowed hard, but the tears came anyway. Around her, others followed, the laughter fading into silence, replaced by quiet sobs. The Americans didn't interrupt. They just stood back, letting them grieve in their own way. It wasn't just the food. It was what it meant. For the first time in years, they were not soldiers. Not prisoners, just human beings allowed to exist without orders. When Yumi finally spoke, her voice was small. "Why?" The young soldier tilted his head. "Why what? Why do you feed us like this?" He shrugged, the simplicity of his answer almost cruel in its gentleness. "Because we can." That night, the camp was different. The air felt lighter, the shadows less sharp. Some women sang softly, songs they remembered from before the war, melodies about cherry blossoms and rivers in spring. Yumi listened, her hands trembling as she cleaned her instruments. She wanted to join them, but her throat refused to obey as she packed the last of the supplies. She found something tucked inside one of the crates, a small note written in English. She could only read part of it. "For those who've seen too much, start again." She folded it carefully and slipped it into her pocket. Later. Under the pale light of a lantern, the American officer called her aside. "You've been assigned to accompany us to Manila," he said. "There are wounded civilians. We need nurses who can translate." Her first instinct was refusal. To leave the camp meant stepping further into the unknown, into a world where the war no longer defined her. But the officer's expression was kind, not commanding. "You'll be safe," he said. "You might even see your home again?" That word again, home. It sounded hollow now. The next morning, she stood at the back of a truck, watching the camp fade behind her. The women waved, some smiling, some weeping. The open road ahead shimmered with heat. Beside her, the young soldier offered her a canteen. "You'll like Manila," he said. "They say the city's healing." She didn't answer. She was looking at the horizon, where smoke still rose faintly from the ruins. The drive was long and silent. The jungle rolled by in endless waves of green, broken only by the wreckage of burned villages and twisted metal. Every few miles they passed the remains of what the war had left behind, helmets, uniforms, sometimes bones. The soldier beside her said nothing, but she could see the shadow in his eyes. By dusk, they reached the outskirts of Manila. What was once called the Pearl of the Orient now lay in ruins. Streets were nothing but rubble. The air smelled of ash and salt. Yet among the wreckage, life had returned, children running barefoot. Women rebuilding walls with their bare hands. The stubborn heartbeat of survival. As the truck slowed, Yumi caught sight of something that froze her breath. A line of Japanese prisoners. Men this time, being marched down the road. They were thin, ragged, sunburned. Some limped. Others stared blankly ahead. The soldiers escorting them wore the same uniforms as the men she had just left. American khaki. But the looks they gave were not cruel. Just wary, one of the Japanese men turned his head slightly as the truck passed. Their eyes met, brief, electric. Yumi felt her heart jolt. He was young, maybe her age. His face streaked with dirt, but unmistakably familiar. He mouthed something she couldn't hear. The truck turned a corner, and he was gone. That night, Yumi lay awake in the field hospital, surrounded by the sounds of pain and recovery. Outside, Manila flickered with campfires and distant music. She thought of the women back in the camp, of the laughter that had turned to tears, of the strange mercy that had broken them open, and she thought of the man on the road, the prisoner whose eyes had found hers. Tomorrow, she would see him again. She didn't know how she knew that, but she did, and when she did, the fragile calm she had begun to believe in would never be the same. Shadows of shame. The rain came without warning. A heavy, tropical downpour that turned Manila's broken streets into rivers of mud. Yumi stood under the sagging awning of the field hospital, watching the water carry away ashes from the burned houses nearby. Each gust of wind carried the faint scent of smoke and salt and something else, the weight of memory. Inside, the wounded moaned softly. Americans, Filipinos, even Japanese. The war had left no one untouched. Yumi moved between the cots with quiet precision, her hands steady, her mind elsewhere. Every face reminded her of someone she had lost, the girls from the camp, her mother's pale smile, her brother in his uniform. But one face haunted her more than any other, the man she had seen on the road. She had not imagined it. She was sure of it now. The tilt of his jaw, the look in his eyes. It was impossible, but she knew him. That night she searched the roster of incoming prisoners assigned to labor duties near the hospital. When she found his name, her breath caught. Hiroshi Sato, her brother's name, her brother's face. But it couldn't be. He had been reported missing 2 years ago after the Battle of Leyte. She had mourned him, built her faith around the idea that he had died honorably, not captured, not defeated. And yet, the record was clear. Private Hiroshi Sato, Imperial Army, transferred from Camp O'Donnell, assigned to assist with hospital repairs. The next morning, she waited by the gate. The guards watched her curiously but said nothing. When the prisoners arrived, shuffling under the weight of their tools, she saw him. His uniform was tattered, his eyes sunken, but there was no mistaking him. "Hiroshi," she whispered. He stopped mid-step. The hammer in his hand dropped into the mud. For a moment, neither moved. Then he spoke, his voice rasped and uncertain. Yumi?" The sound of her name from his lips shattered something inside her. She wanted to run to him, to embrace him, to believe it was real. But the eyes of everyone, soldiers, prisoners, nurses, pinned her in place. "You're alive," she said, trembling. He nodded slowly. "And you are a nurse for them." His voice cracked on the last word, not with anger, but with disbelief. The silence between them was unbearable. Rain began again, thin and cold. Hiroshi turned his gaze toward the ground. "You shouldn't speak to me. It's shame enough that I live." She stepped closer. "You were captured?" "That's not... It's worse than death," he interrupted, his voice rising. "You think I don't know what they said about us? About those who surrender?" He looked at her then, and in his eyes was the same torment that had driven the woman in the camp to the blade. Yumi reached for his arm, but he stepped back. "Go," he said softly. "Go before they see." That night she couldn't sleep. The campfires outside flickered against the rain, shadows dancing like ghosts across the canvas walls. She remembered his words, his broken face, the years she had spent praying for his soul, only to find it trapped in the same living hell as hers. The next day she found an excuse to pass near the workshop where the prisoners labored. Hiroshi was there, silent among the others, his movements slow but precise. He didn't look at her. But when she left a canteen of water by the tools, it was gone when she returned. Over the days that followed, small exchanges replaced words. A folded note hidden in a supply crate. A scrap of cloth wrapped around a coin. Fragments of their lost bond, rekindled in silence. Until one afternoon, when an American officer caught sight of her near the prisoner yard. "You shouldn't be here, nurse," he said, not unkindly. "Some of those men, they're not like the others." Yumi bowed. "He's my brother," she said quietly. The officer paused, studying her. "That's a hard thing," he said finally. "We've got men on both sides trying to figure out what's left of family." He walked away without another word. That evening, Hiroshi was missing from the work detail. Panic surged through Yumi. She searched the records again. No note, no transfer. When she finally asked one of the guards, his answer made her knees weaken. "Prisoner tried to escape last night. Got caught near the river. He's in isolation." She hurried to the makeshift cell, her heart pounding. The guard hesitated, then let her through. Inside, Hiroshi sat chained to a post, his head bowed, his wrists raw. "Why?" she whispered. He lifted his head slowly, his voice a dry whisper. "Because I couldn't stand living like this." "You don't understand. Every breath is a betrayal." "You're wrong," she said, kneeling beside him. "Every breath means you're still human. That's what they couldn't take from us." He laughed bitterly. "You sound like them now?" "I sound like someone who wants you to live?" she said fiercely. He looked at her for a long time, then closed his eyes. Living isn't the same as being free. Before she could reply, the door swung open. The American officer stood there, face stern but not cruel. "He's lucky," he said. "Orders came from command, no executions. He'll serve his sentence." After they left, Yumi stayed a moment longer, pressing her hand to the cold bars. "I'll bring you breakfast tomorrow," she whispered. "Real breakfast. You'll eat it this time." He didn't answer, but when she looked back as she left, his hand was resting against the bars where hers had been. At dawn, she kept her promise. She brought him a tray, bread, rice, and a single slice of fruit. He didn't look at her, but when she turned to leave, she heard the quiet clink of the spoon. For the first time, he ate. As the days passed, whispers spread through the camp that the prisoners would soon be repatriated, that ships were coming to take them home. The word home no longer sounded like hope. It sounded like a question. When Hiroshi was finally released from isolation, he was thinner, quieter, but something in his eyes had changed. The bitterness was softer now, replaced by exhaustion. He met Yumi near the supply tent one evening, the setting sun bleeding gold across the ruins. "They say we're going home," he said. She nodded. "If Japan still feels like home." He looked toward the horizon, where smoke still curled faintly from the distant city. "It has to be. It's all we have left." Before she could answer, a horn sounded from the bay, long, low, and unfamiliar. The camp erupted in motion. Trucks rolled out, soldiers shouting orders, medics rushing to gather supplies. Yumi turned toward the noise, heart racing. "What's happening?" she called to a guard. "New arrivals," he shouted back. "Civilians. Survivors from Japan." She froze. Survivors from a land now burned, bombed, and broken beyond imagination. The trucks came into view as the sun sank behind the palm trees, their silhouettes black against the crimson sky. Yumi stood beside her brother, watching them approach. And when the first figure stepped down, a woman, barefoot, eyes hollow but burning with something fierce, Yumi felt the air leave her lungs, because she recognized her. The woman from the first camp, the one who had laughed at the breakfast table, the one who had sworn she would never bow. Only now her laughter was gone, and whatever story she carried with her from Japan would change everything Yumi thought she knew about freedom. Tasting freedom, the woman's name was Iko Tanaka. Yumi remembered her laughter clearly, the defiant kind that once filled the camp's mess hall when the first American breakfast was served. Akiko had mocked the syrup, the pancakes, the strange kindness of her captors. She had been the loudest voice of pride, the one who swore she would never bow. Now she stood before Yumi again, gaunt and trembling, her hair shorn unevenly, her kimono in tatters. Her eyes, once sharp with contempt, seemed older, ancient even, carrying the kind of silence that only survivors knew. The soldiers guided her group toward the medical tent. They were civilians from Japan, evacuees from Nagasaki. The word struck Yumi like a blade. She had heard rumors whispered among the American medics, rumors of a weapon so powerful it had erased entire cities. But no one in the camp had truly believed it. Not until now, Aika's group walked as if their bodies remembered pain in every step. Yumi stepped forward, unable to stop herself. "Aiko," she said softly. The woman looked up, blinking as though dragged from a dream. You were the nurse." Her voice cracked, dry and hollow. Yumi nodded, trying to offer a smile that didn't come. "You're alive?" Ikeo laughed once, not the laughter of mockery this time, but the hollow echo of disbelief. "Alive," she whispered. "That's what they call this." Inside the tent, Yumi cleaned her wounds, wrapped her blistered hands, listened to fragments of her story. There was no need for translation. The silence between the words said enough. Echo spoke of light, a blinding, searing flash that swallowed everything, of black rain that fell like fire, of shadows burned into walls where people once stood. She said it all quietly, as if afraid the memory itself might still explode. "They said it was the end," Aiko murmured, staring at the wall. "But the end doesn't come all at once. It lingers." Yumi felt her chest tighten. She wanted to say something, anything, but language failed her. Outside, thunder rolled across the bay, though the sky was clear. The sound made everyone flinch. When Aiko finally slept, Yumi stepped outside, her heart pounding with questions she could no longer ignore. The Americans had destroyed entire cities, yet they fed their prisoners, nursed their wounded, spoke of peace. The world had turned upside down, and in that chaos, right and wrong no longer had meaning. That evening, she found her brother sitting by the shoreline, staring out at the ships anchored in the distance. The sea reflected the firelight of the camp, a restless mirror of everything they had lost. "She's from Nagasaki," Yumi said. Hiroshi didn't turn. "I heard." She saw it. "The bomb." He was quiet for a long time, then said, "They say it ended the war." "Ended?" She almost laughed. "It ended the world." Hiroshi's jaw tightened. Maybe it had to. His words stung. Yumi stepped closer, searching his face for the brother she remembered, the boy who once promised to protect her, who believed in honor more than breath itself. "You can't believe that." He looked at her then, eyes dark with exhaustion. "Yumi, we would have fought until there was no one left. You know that." She wanted to argue, but she couldn't. He was right. The empire had demanded everything, even its children. And now it had nothing left to demand. The next day, the camp buzzed with new orders. Repatriation ships were to leave within the week. Prisoners and civilians alike were being registered for departure. For some it was salvation. For others, exile. Yumi felt both. Aiko refused to sign the papers. "There's no Japan left," she said. "Only ashes. What's the point of going back?" Yumi knelt beside her bed. "Then stay here. Help with the wounded." Aiko shook her head slowly. "Help them heal from what we began? I don't deserve that." Her voice carried no anger now, only emptiness. Yumi had seen wounds like that before, the kind that never closed. That night Aiko disappeared. The guards found her by the water's edge, standing barefoot in the tide, staring out toward the dark horizon. Yumi ran to her, breathless, her heart pounding in her ears. "What are you doing?" She shouted over the crashing waves. Aiko turned, the moonlight glinting off her wet face. "Do you remember that breakfast?" she said suddenly. Yumi froze. "Yes," I laughed, Aiko whispered. "I laughed because I thought kindness was weakness, because I thought pride was strength. But when the sky burned, pride turned to dust." She looked up, her voice breaking. "I tasted real freedom that day, and it terrified me." Yumi stepped closer, her feet sinking into the wet sand. "Then don't run from it now." Aiko smiled faintly, a ghost of her old self. "It's too late. I'm already free." Before Yumi could reach her, Aiko stepped forward into the black water. The current pulled her down so quickly, so silently, that the sea seemed to swallow her whole. By morning, they never found her body. The camp grew quiet after that. The news of Japan's surrender felt distant, almost meaningless. The war had ended on paper, but inside each survivor it lived on, in guilt, in grief. In the hollow space where faith used to be, Yumi and Hiroshi were among the last to leave Manila. As their ship pulled away from the dock, the coastline blurred into gray. Yumi stood on deck, clutching the small note she had once found in a supply crate. "For those who've seen too much, start again." She wondered if such a thing was possible. Behind her, the American officer approached, the same man who had watched over the camp. "You'll have a home again," he said gently. Yumi turned toward him, her voice steady but low. "We'll have a country." "That's not the same." He nodded, understanding more than his words could express. "Maybe that's where freedom begins." As the ship cut through the waves, Yumi looked back one last time. Somewhere behind them lay the camp, the breakfast table, the laughter, the tears. Somewhere in that place, the woman she had been had died, and someone new was trying to be born. The wind picked up, scattering salt against her skin. She closed her eyes and whispered to the sea, "We're not prisoners anymore." But deep down, she knew freedom wasn't a destination. It was a wound they would carry home. The horizon was brightening, faint gold piercing through the clouds, a new day breaking over a broken world. And somewhere beyond that horizon, In the ruins of a fallen empire, another story was waiting, one that would decide what Japan became next. Yumi opened her eyes, the sunlight cutting across her face like a blade. For the first time, she didn't flinch. The war was over, but peace was just beginning.